He found himself alone, completely by himself, nobody around. And he just stood there for a second, taking it in. Sun was setting. He knew that he had some quiet time ahead. He wandered off into the hillside and sat, and again looked around, just trying to appreciate the solitude, trying to appreciate that for the first moment in the last 24 to 48 hours, he gets to just sit. Nobody needing food, nobody needing to be healed from their blindness, nobody needing to be raised from the dead, no lesson to give from a synagogue stage. And he sat there, and he decided to spend time just praying to his Father. And just like that, it was over. I'm guessing that it was Peter that came up to him, because Peter just had a knack for coming up when he shouldn't come up and saying what he shouldn't say. But I'm guessing the other 11 were right behind him, and just like that, it was over. They come up to him and said, Jesus, there's a crowd, and they need you. There's a girl, and her father needs you. There's a man, he needs you. There's people that need you. And I can't imagine what the process was in his mind. I can't really empathize with that entirely, but we can probably connect a little bit. After the day goes by and you've poured yourself out, and that alone moment comes, and you know that you should be spending time in prayer, personal devotion, reading, relaxing, taking a nap, watching a show, and the phone rings, the doorbell rings, your wife walks in, your husband yells out, your kids storm in the room, and it's over just like that. What do you guys think he did when they came up? What did this man that we model our church after, what do you guys think he did when the 12 boys came up to him and they said, yeah, it looks like you're in serious prayer, but the masses need you? What did he do? Fortunately, he didn't say, tell him to hold on. I'm not done with my Bible study. That's not the way it goes. That's not the way it ever goes. Not a single time in those alone moments after a day's worth of miracles did he ever choose the alone time over the people that need him. Not once teaching from the front of a church or an alleyway did he say, no, this lesson needs to go out. This lesson is more important than that relationship. Not once did Jesus ever prioritize anything over a potential relationship. Not once. And that's the story of this entire book. That's the story of this entire Bible. From beginning to end, it's the story about a relationship between us and God, and the relationships between us and people that go and build and put flesh onto that relationship between us and God. And so Proverbs is the accelerated course of the Bible when it comes to relationship. It's right smack in the middle. If you've been with us the last few weeks, you're probably a pro. If you have your Bible, pull it out. If you don't have your Bible, grab the one in the pew in front of you. If you're sitting there rubbing your chin around, what's a Bible? It's just a book. It collects everything that God wants us to know about himself. And it should be right there. If you don't know where Proverbs is, just kind of aim for the middle. I don't know how else to put that one. It's 2 P books back to back. If you find Psalms, there's a good chance you will, because it's the longest book in the Bible. Flip through that, go a little bit towards the south in your Bible, and you will find Proverbs. And today, we zero in on the text that have to do with relationships. And we're going to do this by breaking it up into 2 parts. So we're going to do like a bit of a survey. Rather than my typical style where I drone on and on about a story in the Bible, we're going to survey a few texts, a few verses in the Bible. And we're going to start with chapter 1. So if you found Proverbs, you're in great shape. You're already there. If you didn't find it, it's probably projected on the wall behind me. So, yeah, look at that. There it is. Proverbs talks about relationships in 2 main sections, or in 2 main ways. There are 2 types of texts in Proverbs, 2, that define relationships. And so we're going to look at the first type first. This one has to do, well, actually, I'm going to read it to you, and then I'll give you a moment to respond, see if we can narrow down what it is, what it's about. So the first one's in chapter 1, verses 10 through 19. Here's what it says. My son, if sinners entice you, do not consent. If they say, come with us, let us lie in wait for blood. Let us ambush the innocent without cause. Let us swallow them alive like Sheol, even whole, as those who go down to the pit. We will find all kinds of precious wealth. We will fill our own houses with spoil. Throw in your lot with us. We shall all have one purse. My son, do not walk in the way with them. Keep your feet from their path, for their feet run into evil, and they hasten to shed blood. Indeed, it is useless to spread the baited net in the sight of any bird, but they lie in wait for their own blood. They ambush their own lives. So are the ways of everyone who gains by violence. Big picture. What is that text, the one that we just read, what is that telling us about relationships? What's the focus? What's the point? It's like a father speaking to his son. What kind of advice is this?
You're like the people around you.
All right, you're like the people around you. Very, very good. Right.
So choose care.
There you go. The first type of Proverbs text on relationships is all about choosing, right? Because, tell me who your friends are, and I'll tell you who you are, right? That sort of thing. There's also one that's like that about what you eat, right? You are what you eat, something like that. But I always confuse the two. But the first type of text in Proverbs about relationships has everything to do with choosing. And it's laced throughout the whole thing. And we're going to read every single one. I'm kidding. We're going to give you a smattering of them. In fact, I'm going to summarize it for you. It tells you a few things to avoid, and it tells you a few things to find. So if you want to break relationships down in Proverbs, choosing friends or choosing relationships is the first kind, and it tells you what to avoid and what to find. Here's what it tells you to avoid. It actually captures it in 4 very neat categories. One of them is avoid anybody who steals. Now, the deal there, we think of stealing as a very specific action, right? You see my phone, I'm watching you. You see my phone and you come grab it because look at that case, right? But it's mine. We think of stealing in that sense. But Proverbs discusses stealing in a much broader sense. It has to do with gaining by deceit. And it can be by snatching somebody's stuff. It can also be by the words you use, by the way you manipulate people. Gaining by deceit, dishonest gain. Avoid that. Second type of person to avoid, those who cannot control themselves. Those who cannot control their urges. And it captures it, again, with 2 different types of metaphor, 2 types of language. One of them is by people who can't help getting angry. Somebody with a short temper. Somebody who gets pissed off and they mouth off. Somebody that gets angry and punches a door. Somebody that gets angry and lays on their horn, right? People who can't, and that's like the more mild types. But people who just flare up in anger. The other type of people who can't control themselves that Proverbs uses is people that can't stop eating. People who indulge and overindulge. People who fill themselves to excess with stuff and food and drink and anything. They're just ways that Proverbs uses to illustrate a lack of self-control. Those people who cannot govern their impulses, their emotions, their passions. Those things take over and they lose control. So things to avoid so far. Gain by deceit, people who can't control themselves. There's 2 more. People who gossip. People who, for whatever reason, whether they're bored or they think they can manipulate the situation, they think they can position themselves, people who make it a habit to talk about some third party to you. Cut them off. Just nix that. Or, if you're not going to nix it, call it. Say, what? Why are we talking about them? Why are you saying those things? If you want to preserve that relationship, you have to call it out. If you let gossip fester, it will destroy the relationship and the people. So that's 3. Deceitful gain, lack of self-control, gossiping, and there's one more. People who are smooth talkers. I'll give you an example of this one. There's one of several of these are in chapter 16. You don't have to go to this. I'll read it out to you. If you're an overachiever, a straight A student, then you can find it also. but I'll read it to you. I'm going to be reading in 16 from verse 25, and you will catch several of these things that I just said to avoid. You'll catch them in there. Verse 25. There is a way which seems right to man, but its end is the way of death. A worker's appetite works for him, for his hunger urges him on. A worthless man digs up evil, while his words are like a scorching fire. A perverse man spreads strife, and a slanderer separates intimate friends. You're seeing some of these things, right? The gossip, the lack of self-control. A man of violence entices his neighbor and leads him in the way that is not good. He who winks with his eyes does so to devise perverse things. Watch out for those people. Watch out for those people that use violence, that use gossip. Watch out for those people that flatter, that wink at you with their eyes. They sound and they look smooth. There's something else going on. He who winks with his eyes does so to devise perverse things. He who compresses his lips brings evil to pass. That's stuff to avoid. 4 categories to avoid. Stuff to find. There's 3. Throughout the book of Proverbs, there are 3 traits that you want to look for. And maybe as I say these, you're going to think like, yeah, I've got friends that look that way. I have friends that act that way. Maybe you're also thinking like, that's cool. I do that. Fantastic. People who are humble. And this is what it means. It's not the more like classical definition if you're all into like Aristotelian Greek thought, which so many of you are. If you're not into that, that one defines humility as simply having a proper perspective on yourself. You recognize what you can do, you recognize what you can't do, and you know that there's stuff that you're better than, right? It's an appropriate appreciation of the self. That's not what this type of humility is talking about. This is a person who recognizes that it's not all about them. You know that there's people that are the opposite. No matter what you're going through, no matter what you call them for, no matter where you run into them, no matter what's going on, they can redirect a conversation back to them and their problems and their joys and their victories and what they're feeling. And you know that that becomes a drain on relationships. People who are humble, in the proverbial sense, know that it's not all about them, and they don't just enjoy talking about themselves all the time. They don't try to direct your focus to them every time you interact. Humble people, find them. Second one, consistent, and all that means is reliable. Proverbs laces its chapters with examples of people that you want to befriend, have relationships with, even a spouse that you want to find, a wife, a husband, with somebody who is consistently where they say they're going to be. Somebody who consistently does what they say they're going to do. Somebody who recognizes that their word matters. Find somebody that knows it's not all about me, and somebody who says or does what they say they're going to do. And here's the third one. Somebody who loves. And here's how Proverbs actually builds out love. It's not always an emotion that you feel towards a person or a desire or a warmth or things like that. That can certainly be there. The way that Proverbs defines love, though, is with this: seeking the good of the other person. Practically, tangibly, making decisions in life with your time, your assets, your property, your money that benefit the other person, that does good for them in life. Parents probably know exactly what I'm talking about. It's in those moments where you arrange the next 50 years of your life, including your home, your job, the street you live on, the schools that you decide to live nearby, the meals that you buy, the groceries you pack, every single decision that you make is for the good of that child, right? From the moment that you pee on a stick, everything changes. You recognize now it's all about them. That's how Proverbs characterizes love. So, 4 things to avoid, 3 things to find. Are we good so far? This is a quick survey of Proverbs. Like, we're packing probably weeks into about 3 hours here, so hang with me. Second type of thing. So all of that falls underneath, I'm going to go to the left. All of that falls underneath choosing, right? Here's what you avoid, here's what you find. The next sort of thing, we move on from choosing, it's number 2. And I'll read you the text that goes with this, and it's actually going to be projected behind me. But we're going to be in 18, chapter 18, and I'm going to read from verse 19 on. I love it. I hear pages turning. That's like music. It's like divine music when people read their Bibles. At verse 19, see if you can pick up on what sort of a text this is. This goes beyond choosing. Here we go. A brother offended is harder to be won back than a strong city, and contentions are like the bars of a citadel. With the fruit of a man's mouth, his stomach will be satisfied. He will be satisfied with the product of his lips. Death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruit. He who finds a wife finds a good thing and obtains favor from the Lord. The poor man utters supplications. The rich man answers roughly. A man with too many friends comes to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. So we've moved beyond choosing, and there's a lot in what I just read, and we're not going to just break that down word by word, maybe. But for the most part, we went from choosing. What sort of a text was this one? This one's a little harder, but who can pinpoint what sort of counsel is this chapter 18 text giving you? Now that you've chosen your relationships, what comes next? What's that? Nurture them, right. This is all about being in the relationship, edifying the relationship. What does it take to have a healthy, strong relationship? Now that you've avoided what you need to avoid and found what you need to find, what do you do next? And here's what Proverbs does. It gives us 3. It gives us many, but I've chosen 3. Partly because they're the things I'm good at. I'm kidding. Partly because I think they're good. They're important. They're at the top. So I'm going to give you those 3, and then I'm going to encourage you to read the rest of the book. But here's one thing. Top of the list. Learn how to forgive. But it's always coupled with this. Learn how to accept forgiveness. For some reason, accepting an apology and recognizing that you're actually forgiven for the wrong that you did is infinitely harder than apologizing for a wrong that you did. Accepting somebody's forgiveness is infinitely harder, and the Bible knows that. Forgive. That's coupled with a don't seek revenge. Here's number 2. Respect people's time. That one sounds a little counterintuitive, right? Because, time together is what relationships are built on. However, there is a point where your demand on somebody else's time undermines the value of the relationship. And here's why. Because it indicates a lack of humility on our part and a lack of respect for the other person. If there's actually a specific text on this one, 25:17, I'll read you that one real quick. Let your foot rarely be in your neighbor's house, or he will become weary and hate you. Like, it literally says that. So if you've got somebody that, I don't really like this person too much, like, okay, go visit them all the time, hang out, give them a call, text them, like everything that you can possibly do. Nail it. But if you value this relationship, if you think this is a good thing, if it took you a while to avoid these things and find these things, and you finally got it, then respect the person's time. There is a point where that pursuit of that person's attention and focus goes beyond a healthy pursuit of a relationship, and it just becomes a drain on energy, attention, and it breaks all semblance of respect for that person. And then the third thing is actually kind of like the second one. It's respect that person's agency. This one's interesting and this one's tough. This one has to do with recognizing that that person's thoughts on themselves are more important than your thoughts about that person. Missionaries fall into this error all the time. An American missionary mentality for the last 50 years has commonly been, I know what's wrong in that place. I have the resources because I have them at my disposal. I'm going to go tell them how they live in atrocious conditions, and then I'm going to fix it. That is consistently looked down on in biblical relationships. And we do that in our own context, where you see a person, you think, I know what's wrong, and I can fix you. And to be totally honest, it probably happens frequently with our adult children. Because it's tough. After 15, 17, 18, 20 years of you actually knowing what's better for them, to recognize, maybe, just maybe, they know what they're doing. They know what they're saying. Maybe they're making a call and I don't like it, but they're an autonomous person and I need to respect their agency. And so when I visit, maybe I won't tell their spouse how to raise my grandkids, right? It's that sort of thing. That sort of an attitude kills relationships. So once you've chosen, you've avoided what you need to avoid, you've found what you need to find, and then it comes to being, accept and give forgiveness. Respect time. Don't be an attention hog. And third, respect the agency of that person. That person is an autonomous creature of God, the same way that you are. And God's got their best interest in mind. You can let that go. In the very beginning, God made a bunch of stuff out of nothing. He did that for a whole chapter. And then he kept going for a whole second chapter. He kept looking down. He kept saying, I'm doing a pretty good job. Light, nailed it. That was nothing. Water, land, totally separated. There's not a bit of moisture on that side. Animals, plants, leaves, totally good. That's what these people are going to need to live. Let's put them there. He puts a woman. He puts a man. He looks down. Everything is good. Actually, I didn't put the woman there yet. There is one time when God looks down. Just once in the entire creation story. He looks down and he says, this is not good. What was that? When man was alone. Through the entire creation narrative, God hit his standards and he evaluated and he looked back and he said, this is good, this is good, this is good, this is perfect. This is exactly what creation should be. This reflects me. This is what we want. He only looked down and said, oh, wait. I misstepped one time. I shouldn't have put this person by themselves. The entire rest of the narrative, the entire rest of this book, everything is the how-to from that moment on. How to relationship. How do we choose people to be in friendships with? How do we build strong foundations? How do we build community? How do we do life together? How do we connect with God? That is what the entire Bible is, from Genesis 2 on through Revelation. It's reconnecting with God via connecting with people. Proverbs is an accelerated course in that. It is a concentrated list of skills to obtain, to carry out the human purpose of being in connection with each other and hitting a retirement party after this many years of life that is packed with people who love you. That is what Proverbs is. That's the journey that a church is on. With this sermon, we close out our study on Proverbs. And we close out looking back at Jesus. You guys probably called it. He stood up from his meditation. He stood up from his devotional, his prayer time, his nap. And he went to face the needs of the masses. As important as every facet of our Christian walk is, nothing is more important than the relationships that we have with God and with each other. And everything that Jesus did reflected that. The guy spoke volumes, never wrote down a single word himself. He can't look back at a series of publications. He can look back at a trail of changed lives. That's relationships in the book of Proverbs.